All right. Now for part 2 of this free agency bonanza edition, we are pivoting now to some of the big ripple effects from the NBA draft. And to do so, we bring the foremost expert in draft minutia, just the phone systems of Florida businesses, as he was telling us before we jumped on here, and many other things. Hi, Kyle, man.
Hey, how's it going? Usually I get disparaged when initially I get disparaged or insulted or like guilted in some way, so I'm waiting for that to happen. But I'm happy to be here. I'll take the praise. You know, I'm in the defensive. I'm like, what comes next? Usually Verrier kind of gets me with a dagger between the ribs where I'm like, but I'm happy to be here. I'll accept your praise. I love you guys, and let's hope I can help you glean some light on something, Justin.
I don't think we've ever said a bad word about Kyle. I don't know where all this is coming from personally, but, you invite a guy
I think it was Indy. I think Justin kept guilting me when we were in Indy, and I was like, this dude.
And he hasn't thought about it since, clearly. But maybe we can get through some of those unresolved issues here. But no, I feel like some of these teams from the draft have had some pretty interesting after effects, like going into free agency, as we saw. I mean, probably the one deal that we didn't talk about in our first segment, which is probably relevant to this conversation and beyond that, is just the Spurs, who go after picking Stephon Castle, our guy from UConn, and then they pick up Chris Paul here in free agency. What do you think about just that mix? Like, do you think these two guys can coexist, Kyle? Do you think like there's much more of like a passing of the torch thing going on here that Castle needs? But what do you think in terms of phase 2 for Wemby?
Well, you said our guy, and he's, I like him, but I mean, he's like your guy since you're the UConn obsessive, right? Castle just kind of fits everywhere. I think especially if you have like a handling 5, I think you can probably get away a little bit more with. And granted, they have other things to do. Castle makes the most sense as I think he's going to be a tough assignment defender. He's very switchable. He showed a lot of interest in being like having off-ball motor, which I think is an admirable thing for any basketball player these days. So, I mean, he played in a system that was sort of a high post cutting and screening thing, and I think he's going to fit really well. I think it poses some questions about. It creates some dissonance, I think, between him and between Keldon and between Sohan, because as much as San Antonio was willing to pass and move the ball last year, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was very weak at times. They just arguably had several, mostly non-NBA players at different times on the court. So it poses a question for me of just kind of like, what are they going to do next? There are other teams that this is true of as well. But a guy like Sohan just creates... Keldon's not exactly a knockdown shooter either. I mean, he's gotten better, but it just creates sort of like future questions for me. If you like Castle that much, maybe he's a cheaper version and you can kind of have flexibility to make moves for things you do need, because I do think that Keldon and Sohan and Vassell have shown enough to have interest from other teams, but that's kind of where I'm thinking with that pick so far.
And it makes sense, too, when you put Chris Paul in that formula, right? If you have a point guard who is organizing everything, now you get to mix and match the wings and say, okay, do we want more of a switchable designated defender? Do we want more of a facilitator like Sohan? Do you want the sort of slasher and driver that Keldon Johnson is? Or the kind of pick and roll, catch and shoot guy like Devin Vassell? You have the full complement of variety of wings at your disposal now, and you have a point guard who can actually make sense of them for the first time in the Wemby era. So I think that honestly goes a long way.
I wonder what you guys think about the idea that the Spurs would trade out of that 8th pick and, get basically 2 future firsts out to like 2030 or 2031 or whatever. Because, obviously there was a lot of chatter about, they need to get talent in. They need to be in a win now situation, and trading for picks that are 7 years away is the opposite of that when you have the opportunity to add talent to your team. I'm just wondering, because to my mind, the Spurs front office haven't done anything cool besides draft Wemby #1 in years. So I just wonder what that says about what they're trying to do with the team.
Yeah, I mean, the Chris Paul signing, if anything, as much as it fits like what you want around Wemby, is just kind of hitting the pause on any sort of meaningful progress, right? It's just a suggestion that they're going to take this thing painfully slow. And so as like a fan of Wemby and wanting to see him compete on the highest level, this kind of really hurts my heart to a large degree, as much as like I do think Paul will probably help them in small, meaningful ways. But that just means like they're probably not going to compete at a high level next year.
Is it painfully slow? I mean, Chris Paul's a veteran guy. It's not like they brought in a 19-year-old to run point.
Rob, he's going to play 35 games. Come on.
35 games?
Like,
What was
Chris
the number
Paul,
again?
like-
Was it 11? 11 for how many years was the deal? What were the numbers on that? I don't have it in front of me.
I actually didn't see the terms yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it
I
just
can't
made me-
imagine it's too much.
It just made me wonder. I mean, there are obvious positives of bringing in Chris Paul. I mean, he is sort of the pick and roll like guru. I think he kind of did that as much as the relationship between him and DeAndre Ayton was just him shouting at DeAndre Ayton. I don't think that's going to be the case with Wemby. I think that like it's a nice, just sort of nice little sort of tutorial for him for this year. You know, he's a brilliant basketball player. He works with. You just hear countless stories of young guards. I'll be surprised sometimes about like players that he's worked with. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know he was connected to that person. I mean, it'll be good on that front. It makes me wonder, are they done is the question. Are we positive that like that CP is the end of that line of thinking? Because on paper, like Waz was saying, why not Dillingham? You know, because everything that I heard about Dillingham, you know, other than the stuff people have been weird about, like the Donda Academy stuff, everything connected to that. It seems like he's had some weird situations with like who's around him. You hear that every single year in and year out with prospects, and it's hard to know or even speak on it with any authority or confidence. But I just think that it was weird for me because Dillingham is such an ultra talent. Maybe Minnesota was just in a better, I guess I'm shifting to Dillingham a little bit here, but it was in a better situation to sort of protect him defensively, or, you know, their team was more ready to sort of put him in a good position. Whereas in San Antonio, you just throw Dillingham out there, it's going to be a lot messier in the short term because as talented and brilliant as he was, people haven't mentioned the fact that, I mean, he would disappear for long stretches. He was, even at the college level, a huge defensive target a lot of the time. So I don't know. But circling all the way back, it just makes me wonder if they're done. Do you guys think that they're done in terms of like making a move or adding another, you know, adding more point guard talent?
Maybe for now, but yeah, this is why I would almost say why not both? Like I would have loved a universe where they have Paul and Dillingham together, and Chris Paul's teaching him as much as helping the rest of the team along. And that way you don't have to worry about CP being an older player who's only going to play however many games he plays or however many minutes he plays. There's a larger project at work versus now, you know, you have CP for however much you have him and however long you have him, but otherwise you have more or less at present the same core plus
team.
Stephon Castle. So we know that team isn't good enough, even with another year of development. They do need to make meaningful additions. I just don't know that, to your point, Justin, they've expressed the urgency through this deal to reflect that they are willing to do that just yet.
Yeah, and I'd almost split the difference there, where it's like, yeah, the fan in me is a little disappointed, but I almost wonder if long-term this might pay off in a big way, because I've been thinking about this. We all talk about maybe short-term, like, superstar upgrades, specifically at the point guard spot for them. Trae Young, Darius Garland, etc. Everyone's been talking about would they fit with the Spurs. And I'm like, if you have Wemby, who in his first year has suggested to be one of the best players on the planet already, shouldn't we be thinking bigger than that? Like, shouldn't we be actually targeting, like, when Luka Doncic could be a free agent a couple years from now? Like, we should be thinking on the highest level in terms of our big swing. So a trade like that that's going to potentially return maybe a good pick years down the road opens up that possibility, as opposed to some of these more half-measure moves, which would make them better in the immediate. So I kind of like it from that extent.
Look, I'm somebody who has a respect for job security, and I'm happy when people have it. But this is the sort of downside of having freaking RC and Pop in there as immovable objects, because they just feel like they can do whatever the hell they want. They don't have to rush. They don't have to do anything. Nobody's pressuring them to accomplish anything in the near future. So they're taking the tact of, we can be as painstakingly precise as we want or need to be. And that's the approach they're taking. I think a different regime regime in there would be like, look, we have this generational talent. He's put it on the floor. Like, he's shown that he's going to be a special guy. Let's, hit the gas on this thing. But when you can't be fired, you don't have to worry about doing things in the immediate that might not be so, future focused.
But when you are that concerned with the immediate, you go the Dell Demps in New Orleans route.
Sure.
And put that kind of mid-veteran team around Anthony Davis. Or you go the Donnie Nelson route in Dallas and overinvest in veterans when maybe it would have been better to slow play it. This is obviously the great philosophical part of having a player like Wemby. Does he push you forward with urgency because he's so good, or does he buy you time because he's so good? I kind of err on the side of buying time. And I think if you can afford and he's willing to take one more year at a relatively slow pace of gradual improvement, take the win. Take the job security, take the patience if your player will afford you to do that.